Hello everyone, wishing you all a pleasant morning. This webinar is initiated by Primed Talent Limited. It was incorporated in the year 2016 in the heart of London to address the growing challenges in the talent supply chain, to create a strong pipeline of talent. It is revolutionizing talent to empower organizations for the current and future business cycles. Prime Talent believes in taking action to unlock the untapped potential of the emerging workforce, a hub for all things talent related, leveraging a decade of expertise impacting professionals worldwide. Prime Talent has hosted several such webinars, each catering to incredibly insightful and beneficial career-related topics. And today's topic is diversity and inclusion in the Northeast tech sector. I am Ekta Gupta, Behavioral Skills Trainer for Prime Talent UK and today's host. We have convened together here to discuss current landscape of diversity and inclusion in the Northeast tech sector, the challenges faced by marginalized groups in the industry, the importance of inclusive hiring practices, the importance of diversity in leadership roles, and other significant points. I take pleasure in introducing Caroline Williamson, who is the Skills Manager at Sunderland Software City, focusing on Tech Talent Engine program to enhance the digital skills pipeline in the Northeast. Caroline is dedicated to improving employment opportunities across the tech sector within the Northeast by aiming to bridge the skills gap for regional businesses and individuals. She has extensive experience in business development, stakeholder engagement, and recruitment for the tech sector, addressing both current and future skills gaps in the digital industry. Before we proceed further, Caroline, hello, could you please tell us something more about yourself?
Hi, yeah, thanks for having me. So I don't really know how to top that introduction. That was excellent, thank you. So like Ekta said, I'm Caroline, I'm Skills Manager at Sunderland Software City. For anyone who's not familiar, we're a non-profit organisation. We're here to grow and develop the tech sector in the northeast of England. We do that in a few different ways. We work to help more businesses get started through our starter programs. We work with existing businesses to help them use tech better. And as Ekta said, I work in our skills team, which is centred around how do we get more people into more tech jobs within the region.
Thank you, Caroline. That is wonderful. So my first question to you, Caroline. The Northeast has been making significant strides, establishing itself as a tech hub. Your work on Tech Talent Engine is instrumental in its growth. Given the region's increasing prominence in tech landscape, how do you see the role of diversity and inclusion shaping the future of Northeast tech sector?
Yeah, so I think one of the only ways we can gain real traction and continue growing, and I think maybe even more importantly than that, promoting the tech sector we have in the region, is to make sure that we're developing a community that feels really open to everyone. I think it's really important that people understand how closely diversity and innovation are linked. And while I personally obviously think we should all be trying to build a more diverse sector because it is the right thing to do ethically, I think it's really important when we're speaking to businesses that they understand it's also the right call commercially. And we deal a lot in innovation at Software City, and I think real innovation, and whether that is developing a new technology or starting a brand new business or adopting a new business model, that only really happens when you have diversity of thought and experience. And I think if we're trying to foster this type of innovation, one of the key ways that our region certainly is able to continue growing and developing is through fostering that innovation. And we can only do that by making sure we have a diverse workforce.
Totally understandable, and that sounds brilliant. As we know, the Tech Talent Engine focuses on bridging the skills gap. How does your program address the specific needs of marginalized groups in tech industry, and what measures are in place to ensure equitable access to opportunities?
Yeah, I think it's something we are very, very aware of. When we started designing the Tech Talent Engine programme, we were really aware from all of the other work Sunderland Software City and our partners have taken part in around digital skills, that there are issues in the way businesses traditionally try to attract candidates. And that has historically disadvantaged some candidates over others. I think one of the key issues that cropped up repeatedly through our conversations when we were developing the platform was the challenge people have in their early careers to even just start to understand what some of the job titles being advertised mean, as well as being unsure of how they can gain the skills needed for these roles. So with that in mind, we built the platform to be accessible to everyone, whether they are people looking to apply for a more senior role or people just starting to think about a career in tech. We really wanted Tech Talent Engine to be a place anyone could come to find out where they kind of fit almost within the sector. I think we're also very big advocates at Tech Talent Engine and Software City of appreciating transferable skills. And we really see the value of kind of what we would call squiggly careers. And we try and impart this on the businesses we work with as much as possible. So one of the examples we use a lot is the requirement to have a STEM degree for entry-level development roles. And I think I absolutely appreciate the value of a degree and kind of have a degree myself, but quite often this isn't really necessary for the role being advertised. And I think businesses aren't always aware that adding that as a requirement actually excludes a huge amount of candidates. So that might exclude people from disadvantaged backgrounds who are unable to attend university for financial or other reasons. It can often exclude women who we know complete STEM degrees in much lower numbers than their male counterparts, again, for a whole host of reasons. And also candidates with neurodiversity who might not have excelled in academic environments. And when we put in, just to kind of use this as an example, when we put a STEM degree as a requirement for an entry-level role, there are huge amount of those groups that we are excluding that absolutely would have the transferable skills and actually the technical skills they need to do the role. So I think getting businesses to think differently about recruitment and what their requirements are and what their process is one of the key goals for Talent Engine, and something we like to think we work really hard to try and impart on all of the organisations that we work with.
Isn't that wonderful? That sounds, perfect blend of wisdom and empathy. Thank you. So, however, kindly let us also know how would you characterize the current state of diversity and inclusion in the Northeast UK tech sector compared to other regions in the UK? Are there specific areas where the Northeast excels or lags behind?
Yeah, so I really wouldn't like to say there's one area we are particularly brilliant at, as to be honest, there is always more work to be done. And I think we could always improve, whether that's individuals, as businesses, as a region, there is always more work to be done. I think one of the statistics and kind of thinking about what we excel or lag behind at in terms of diversity in the Northeast, one of the statistics I'm always really concerned about is the staggeringly low volume of candidates we have from lower socioeconomic backgrounds who go on to work in tech. So I'm from the Northeast. I'm from an area with quite high levels of child poverty, and it's something I'm always really conscious of, is that we know only 8% of the tech sector come from lower socioeconomic backgrounds. So I think as a region who do have high levels of that, there's definitely more work we can do to improve this and to kind of draw on some of the talent that we know is out there waiting to be discovered. I think tons of that, and a lot of that is just around getting the message out there that tech is here and it's an option for everyone. And I have some brilliant colleagues who work closely with schools in the region to get that message out there and get some really great interactions with young people. So I think that's one of the areas we should definitely be focusing on. Having said that, I do think there's a lot of great work being done across the region for women in tech. So we have a really strong volunteer-led group in the region, just called Women in Tech. You can find them on LinkedIn. They're absolutely nothing to do with me. I just think they do good work. They promote the great work women are doing across the sector, and they really try and support and lift each other up. And I think slowly but surely, the message is starting to work, and we are seeing an increase on women looking for work in the sector. So for the first time this year on our Tech Talent Engine platform, we actually had more women than men clicking through to the site for the first time, which we were quite excited about. That means it's getting out there and it's starting to get the message through.
Thank you for sharing. And you already mentioned women, because my next question is in respect to women and ethnic minorities in the UK tech sector. Now, they continue to face significant challenges in achieving parity in representation, pay, leadership roles. Given this national context, what are the most significant challenges faced by women, ethnic minorities, and people with disabilities in securing and advancing their careers in the Northeast tech sector?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I think there are a lot of unique challenges being faced by ethnic minority candidates entering the sector. And if I'm totally honest, I'm probably not not the best person to talk about challenges that I don't have experience of. But in terms of women entering the sector, I think there's a lot more work we can do around offering flexibility, starting to understand transferable skills and making sure that we're really prioritising diversity and inclusion over that kind of almost quick win of hiring an experienced candidate who we know, when we look at historical data, they are going to be from a much less diverse pool, because if they have 10 years experience in the tech sector 10 years ago was not as diverse as it is even now. I think the questions around kind of flexibility and transferable skills come into play a lot when we start thinking about candidates, definitely women, but also candidates with disabilities. So a lot of accommodations people with disabilities were asking for kind of 10, even 5 years ago are now really commonplace. Things like flexible work and remote work and digital first approach for meetings. And businesses that are able to be a bit more forward thinking about their working and their recruitment practice have definitely seen an increase in these kind of applications. And they've definitely reaped the benefits of kind of laying the groundwork and being a little bit more accommodating in the past. And in terms of pay, the issues about pay and representation are definitely complex. And I think there's two ways to look at this. I think, firstly, we need to be teaching people the soft skills that they need to advocate for themselves in the workplace. I think women in particular are quite often reluctant to be their own advocates, for fear of how they're perceived, and that can hold back their pay and progression. We know women don't go in and ask for a pay rise as often. We know women aren't quite as forward in kind of advocating for themselves. And I think teaching them the soft skills, to be able to do that is definitely one way. And secondly, I think the more diverse we can make our leadership teams, the more likely they are to advocate for others to be given this opportunity. We know, and just from kind of experience, if you have women in a leadership team, they understand the challenges women further down the company are facing. It is a really complex, and it is absolutely not one size fits all at all, but I think communication and approaching things with a really open mind is a good place to start from a business perspective.
We had lost you there for a second, but I'm sure the efforts you put are marvelous. No, that's all right. You were quite clear in your explanation. That was honestly marvelous. Thank you. So while practices like blind resume reviews and unconscious bias training have shown promise in mitigating bias in hiring, what specific strategies can Northeast tech companies implement to create a more inclusive recruitment process and increase diversity amongst their workplace?
So I think unconscious bias training is great, and I think definitely something anyone involved in recruitment at any level should be aware of, whether that is from an HR perspective, whether that's junior recruiters, anyone in that process needs to be aware of unconscious bias. And I do think practices such as blind recruitment can absolutely be great in mitigating that unconscious bias and opening the door maybe to a more inclusive workforce. But, and totally just my opinion, I don't think it's the magic fix to a diverse workforce that we sometimes pitch it as. I think you'll never be able to hire a diverse team if you're not applying for your roles. So the first step to make sure you're using inclusive language in your job adverts and that they're being publicised across different platforms. You can't hire people who aren't applying. The first thing you need to do is get diverse people, a diverse candidate pool applying for your roles. I think thinking really carefully about what your requirements are also an important step. So we talked earlier, do you need a university degree? Could someone with skills from another sector fill this role? What about parents who are returning back to work after having the children? Just thinking really carefully about what you're listing as a requirement. And again, this comes back a little bit. There is data out there that says women are less likely to apply for a role if they don't meet every single requirement. So thinking really carefully about what those requirements are can help attract more diverse pool of applicants. Also, and again, this is totally my personal opinion, I'm not a massive fan of the traditional kind of job advert to CV to interview model. And I think particularly in the tech sector, using more practical options, so things like portfolios, technical tests, even cover letters, which I know people shudder at a little bit, can start to give candidates from more diverse backgrounds a better chance to succeed. And I think starting with what you need someone to do in this role and working backwards from there is a good strategy. Kind of what are the actual requirements day to day and who could do that? So what skills do they need? How could they show you these skills? How could you test these skills? And I think quite often there are non-traditional ways to recruit that might not only avoid a little bit of unconscious bias, but also give you a better understanding of the candidate skill level. And things like boot camps and programs that you guys run and we run are a great way to start testing people like that as well.
I'm sure many will appreciate your insights. Thank you, Caroline. Given the fierce competition for top tech talent, how does a diverse and inclusive workplace contribute to a company's reputation as an employer of choice in Northeast?
Yeah, I mean, all of the information we have at the minute says that the future workforce, and I'm kind of talking the very youngest millennials and Gen Z specifically here, are much more values driven than any generation before them. And on the whole, it's seen as really important for them to work for a company who shares their values. And I think a lot of that seems to centre on working in a fair and inclusive environment where they feel their contributions are valued and the company's treating their employees fairly. And building an inclusive workforce, it's absolutely a beneficial thing to be doing now. You know, we talked earlier, it is commercially the right thing to do. But also companies that can build their reputation on this now are going to have a much easier time building their talent pipeline in the next 5-10 years than those that are just focusing on those kind of quick fix, reactive recruitment, financial benefits to attract talent. I mean, just as an example, Northeast, we have a company called Opencast, who are a consultancy people might have heard of, and they've really focused their culture and recruitment strategy around advertising their values and really kind of promoting themselves as a leader in AD&I within the region. And as a result of that, they have a huge amount of applications. They have very few issues attracting high caliber talent from across the region. And that's really just testament of the work that they've done in this area. And I think the more businesses start adopting that model, the more that we'll see those kind of improvements and that they'll see the benefits as well in getting a stronger talent pipeline through.
That's really good to know, giving more confidence in this belief. My next question is that studies indicate that employee turnover rates tend to be higher among marginalized groups in the tech industry. How can Northeast tech companies address this issue by creating a workplace culture that fosters belonging, care, growth, and overall job satisfaction for all the employees?
Yeah, I think it is a really difficult one, and I think it's a really complex issue that and again, I've probably said this a lot, but I think just because diversity and inclusion is one of those topics where there isn't a one size fits all answer. I think starting to address it always starts with a little bit of introspection and a little bit of kind of asking why. So if underrepresented groups are leaving your company, then you need to be willing to do the quite difficult work sometimes of looking inward and working out why that is, and probably as importantly, reaching out to get new perspectives on this. So having a culture of openness and a structure in place to gain feedback on the causes of attrition, and that could be really strong exit interviews, that could be employee feedback surveys, or even just trying to build a culture where employees feel able to raise concerns, are all kind of critical in pinpointing where you're falling down when it comes to this. I think with all of the will in the world and all of the programs and all of the information we give you, there is no substitute for just asking the question. And if you can build an open culture where people feel able to speak out about this, then that might lower attrition. Even if it doesn't lower attrition, at least you know why they are leaving, and you can start doing the work to counteract that and to build backwards from that as well.
How true and beautifully expressed. Thank you. Another concern is that given the importance of mentorship and sponsorship in career progression, how can Northeast tech companies effectively leverage these programs to accelerate the advancement of marginalized talent within the organization?
Yeah, mentorship's a really interesting one. I think there are some brilliant programs out there. Some of them are being managed across the sector, including some of the work we're doing at Software City. And there's also some really good programs being run by individual organisations. I think you've got to make a conscious effort to make sure that these kind of mentoring programs, if you do choose to run them in any organisation, take into account the unique needs of participants. So it's great to design the type of program that would have helped you when you started, but what about people from different backgrounds to your own? So what do they need? So trying to kind of, and this probably all still comes back to having a diverse workforce, but trying to pull on that diverse workforce and go, like, in my opinion, this is what would have helped me. What would have helped you when you started, and what would have helped your peers, and kind of asking those questions. And I think the best way to do that is just to ask. Like, you don't know what you don't know. And it doesn't help anyone to kind of avoid awkward conversations by trying to guess what support people like. You just really have to get out there and ask them. And that's something we have done quite extensively at SSC. I think alternatively, also companies that are looking to offer kind of financial support and sponsorship programs can also look to support and build on the work of existing programs. I'm obviously going to say Tech Talent Engine here, but there are tons of them across the Northeast and also across the UK generally. So to help them really reach outside of their own network, if you are in a business that wants to support upcoming talent and wants to help with that kind of thing, but you maybe don't have the network or you don't have the time, there will be somebody out there doing that work already. And if you can get behind them, then that is all the better. I mean, we know it's hard to keep up with the demand for this kind of support, and it can be hard to run these programs in a small business. So I think it was Forbes done a report last year that said 76% of people in data and AI see the benefit of a mentor, but only 37% of them have been able to access that. And that is very much mirrored in what we see speaking to individuals. There is always a higher demand for people who would like mentorship than people who are able to offer it. So collaborating together to run those kind of programs and support what's already out there is also a good way to do it if you don't have capacity.
That was very well said. Thank you. Very well expressed. We are also aware that unconscious bias can significantly impact workplace culture and decision making. What strategies can Northeast tech companies implement to identify, challenge, and address unconscious bias at all levels of organizations to foster more equitable and inclusive environment?
Yeah, I think ensuring that teams are trained to be aware of unconscious bias is kind of crucial to building a culture that avoids it. So making everyone aware of what that is kind of step one almost. There are some absolutely brilliant experts out there who you can bring in, offer training to teams. If you're a smaller business, there is a huge amount of free resources that can help you kind of build a focus on this into your induction. And I think induction is the point where you need to introduce it as a concept and you need to introduce it as one of your values. I think regular refreshers are also a good idea. It's something we've kind of done as a business is kind of refresh everyone on unconscious bias. And I've brought this point up a few times, but making sure your employees feel able to challenge anything that they see or they feel is probably the most important way you can address these issues. It's great to give them all the training. We absolutely need to give people the skills and the understanding of what these biases are. But I think also you can't just give them the skills and hope that they'll bring it up if you don't have the type of culture where they feel confident doing that. So that kind of comes back to your culture a little bit. It's great to include, like I said, absolutely include it in your induction. But if you're not regularly checking in and you're not making it a part of the values that feed into the work you're actually doing and the way that your employees interact with management teams and with each other and with external stakeholders, then you maybe haven't gained anything from that training. So I think making sure that it's a skill that you teach everyone and that it's part of your company's skill set and soft skills and induction is great, but also checking back in and making sure it's really one of your values and people feel confident to challenge it if they don't feel like it's being actioned.
All right, and your strategies seem to be capable of not, only solving the issues that we are discussing, but extending to more areas. So we have also evidently seen, Caroline, a strong link between diverse leadership teams and improved organizational performance, with research consistently demonstrating that companies with greater leadership diversity tend to outperform their peers. How can Northeast tech companies encourage greater diversity in leadership positions?
So I think, and we kind of touched on this earlier, we are slowly starting to reap the rewards of some of the work that's been done in the region over the last few years and build more diverse teams, certainly at a junior and a mid-level. But I do think when it comes to senior leadership, there's definitely still quite a big gulf. So one of the most valuable pieces of advice I was ever given around recruitment was always to make sure to recruit people who add to an organization's culture rather than those that just fit with it. And I think that's even more true at a leadership level and at a senior management level. I think it's great to have a leadership team who are on the same page when it comes to strategic direction. But if we look at companies who innovate and push the boundaries and really challenge themselves in the sector, they generally tend to be companies who have a real diversity of thought within their teams. And the only way you get that is by bringing people into management who do bring a different viewpoint and do come with a different view of the world and lived experience. So I know a study from, it's a few years old, I think it's from about 2019, found that a diverse leadership team will make better decisions up to about 87% of the time, and that's across all industries. So I do think tech in particular can go much further in this area, and there's absolutely, but there are benefits to having a diverse leadership team no matter what sector you operate in. And again, when we say diverse, I think that could be because of their background, that could be because of their gender, where they were brought up, whatever it is that gives people their own unique viewpoint on the world is something that, especially at a leadership level, we need to be viewing as a strength rather than just a difference.
The initiative surely make difference. Thank you. And beyond traditional approaches, how can technology be leveraged to promise diversity and inclusion within organizations? Can you share specific examples of successful implementations in the tech sector that Northeast companies could learn from?
Yeah, so it's one of the things that I always find really interesting about the tech sector is organizations who are trying to recruit really creative people or really techie people or developers or anyone who builds with tech really. And they use this kind of old school CV as a way to do that. Like, we have so much interest in technology out there that would let us view portfolios, see real life examples of the work in a different way, that it does feel a little bit archaic to me that we're still running a sector on CVs and LinkedIn profiles and all of this kind of stuff. So I think companies need to be open to trying new things when it comes to technology in the recruitment process. So that could be, and examples of things we've seen used kind of across the sector in the region are things like technical tests in place of interviews, which, first of all, we know interviews can be a major source of unconscious bias and also don't necessarily test the skill you need for some of the more technical jobs. We've seen companies viewing GitHubs rather than CVs as a form of blind recruitment. So you are just looking at the code, you are not looking necessarily at what their university they went to or what jobs they had when they were younger or anything like that. And even just making sure that adverts are when they're being published are going out to new job advertising platforms. So rather than just putting an ad on LinkedIn and hope for the best, we've talked to businesses about where else they can advertise that, whether that is through something like Talent Engine or whether that is through community organisations or social media or just kind of other ways of getting the message out there that you're hiring and you're looking for people and how to get in touch. So I think we're a sector, and tech specifically is a sector that always wants to know what's next and what's new and what's exciting and what's coming up and how do we do things different. And for some reason, it hasn't filtered through to our recruitment practices yet. I think it's starting to, and we are getting there. But it's not all of the way there yet, and there's definitely more interesting and creative and especially technical ways that we can start doing that.
This is how the best plans are laid, I'm sure. So when we consider government, industry partnerships, and educational institutions, they have a crucial role to play in driving positive change in diversity and inclusion within the region. How can these stakeholders collaborate effectively to create a more equitable and inclusive tech ecosystem in the Northeast?
Yeah, so as someone who works with a lot of these stakeholders, I do think one of the strengths of the Northeast really is our ability and probably more importantly, our willingness to collaborate. So organisations like ours work with all of these groups to help foster collaboration and to make sure that there are opportunities for everyone. And that can be things like taking on initiatives that would struggle to get off the ground commercially or helping local authorities use their funding to better reach industry. I think there's always more work to do, and it's brilliant to start seeing some of the work being started by our new Northeast Combined Authority. But I think getting the message out to education and industry is really key, because whether it's government or private enterprise or education, I think growing a more inclusive sector isn't something any of these kind of groups can do alone. And we all need to continue to collaborate and work together and really just be willing to do what we think is right to make sure the sector continues to thrive and really becomes a place where everyone can feel valued in the Northeast.
Caroline, thank you for your perspective. It is extremely appreciated. And with this, we have reached almost at the end of our session. Let's open the floor to questions from our inquisitive audience members. Meanwhile, Caroline, I have some personal question for you. It could be from me, you can say, or it is, I think our audience would like to know more about you. Could you please enlighten about your role? And, because you have been quite crucial in this discussion in the last 30 minutes. So you and your organization, could you please elaborate a little more role about yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. So in our skills team at Sunderland Software City, like I said, we're a non-profit, so we run predominantly publicly funded programs. At the moment, we are delivering some upskilling programs. So we are doing some work experience programs in Sunderland, Gateshead and the North of Tyne areas. We do some skills boot camps at a kind of customer service level, right through to DevOps. We have the Tech Talent Engine program, which is an online resource hub for anyone looking to work in tech to find out more about how they do that. And we have very recently, within the last month and a half, hired 10 junior software developers to work for Sunderland Software City to help address what we think is an experience gap. So one of the things that started coming up a lot is that we think we've talked about a skills gap for years in the Northeast, and we definitely have a skills gap. But we also think, probably more importantly, we have an experience gap. We have tons of people with all, and you'll see this absolutely in the work that you do, tons of people with all of the skills they need to go into these jobs, and they struggle to get that first role because they don't have experience. So we've hired some of them to get them some experience, and hopefully in the next 6 months we can get them moved on to permanent roles in other organisations who can kind of invest a little bit more and give them a bit more growth.
That was wonderful. Thank you for letting us know. Yes, we are waiting for some questions to be here because we have got so many already, and I am going to, okay, here I have. Oh, yes. So I have the first question for you from the audience, Caroline. Hi, I'm a mother who recently transitioned into tech after a long career in healthcare. Balancing parenting with a new career has its challenges to see. What kind of support or resources can tech companies offer to help people like me who are juggling caregiving responsibilities while trying to establish a new career path?
Yeah, so I mean, first of all, well done on the career transition, because that is amazing. There's a lot of stuff out there. I think tech, and one of the strengths of the tech sector is that we are quite embedded in kind of hybrid and flexible work, and I think it is crucial that we are offering that, particularly for parents and caregivers and kind of people who, and anyone really, who might need that flexibility. So I would be looking at trying to work for companies who offer, if not fully remote, at least hybrid and flexible hours where they kind of don't mind, if you're, and I don't know how old your children are, if they're school age, if companies that don't mind if you block yourself out for an hour and a half in the afternoon to go pick them up from school, get back and then log back on. If they are at kind of nursery age, then again, companies that are willing to give you that bit of flexibility. I think there's probably also something in there about support as well. So looking at companies that, this is probably bigger companies, if I'm totally honest, that have that kind of structure in place where if you are, because that's a lot that you're doing, if you are struggling with that or you need a little bit of extra support, companies that know where to refer you to get that, or maybe have something in-house where they can connect you with people who've been through this process and kind of understand where you're coming from. So yeah, I would look for companies that give you hybrid, give you flexible work, and go on their website and the career page, and if they have something specifically set up for parents, they will shout about it on the career page. They'll want to. So it should be easy to find if you're looking for it.
Thank you for the advice. That was wonderful. And my next person is GitHub. There is a question mark after that. How can a non-tech career changer benefit from it for a job interview if they have never used it before?
Yeah, sorry, that I did just kind of drop that in and then give no context to what that means. So GitHub is something that software developers generally use to kind of host their code on. So it's something that we, and I'm saying we, I can't tell if code's good or not. That's I'm recruitment, and that's kind of my background rather than development. It is specifically only useful if you are kind of in that software development sphere. And if companies are recruiting for a software developer role, then checking things like GitHub can be a really useful tool for them. And likewise, if you're applying for software developer roles, promoting your GitHub and kind of any projects you've worked on in your own time and any little portfolio pieces so they can look at the code and see what you've done is brilliant. If you're a non-tech career changer, and I'm going to take this to mean someone who hasn't worked in a technical role, who is moving to a non-technical role in the tech industry. So things like project management and business analysis and user research and all of that kind of stuff. In all honesty, it's not that useful for you. There's probably not a huge amount you can use it for. But absolutely, you can still look at kind of putting portfolio stuff together that explains what your skills are, projects you've worked on before. It's just that rather than it being a GitHub, it's probably more likely to be a presentation or a document or something like that.
I'm sure you must be helpful. Thank you. We have another. So we have too many questions pouring in. All right, let's see how many we can take. Hi there. I am a senior developer working in a mid-sized tech company in Durham. I have noticed that we have a diverse workplace, but retention seems to be an issue, especially among women and minority employees. What are some effective strategies to foster a stronger sense of belonging and improve retention?
So I think first things first is trying, and you absolutely might not be able to do that because there might not be a clear answer for it. Looking into why that is. So if you can do some employee surveys, if you can get even just focus groups of people who are willing to come sit in a boardroom with you for a couple of hours and talk about their opinions on this. If you can do this during your exit interviews, even better, because people, in my experience, will be brutally honest with you in an exit interview because they've got no kind of skin in the game anymore if they're already leaving. So starting to look into why they're leaving is kind of point one. Is there anything obvious? Is it something where you can point to it and go, this is the thing we do that stops that feeling of inclusive belonging within these groups? If you can't do that, or if nothing clear comes out of that, then I think it's probably you start looking at what you can do. So what can you do proactively? So in kind of mid-sized tech company, you're probably on the borderline of having enough people to be able to do this. But if you can organise a group that is specifically for women or parents or people from kind of BAME backgrounds or anything like that, to be almost a there's a word for this, and someone told us they called it employee resource groups, a company I was speaking to quite recently, where they had an LGBTQ employee resource group where a selection of their LGBTQ employees got together once a quarter to talk about what the company had done well, what they hadn't done well, and they fed it back to the SLT. And they started to implement that as part of their strategy, and they worked really closely with HR on that. So employee resource groups and almost self-managed groups are something to look at. If all else fails around that kind of stuff, then it maybe comes down to a team level. So I would also want to look in at, be kind of trying to go, is it just one team that this is happening? Is it organisation wide? Is it happening at a really senior level, at a junior level, at every level? There's probably quite a substantial bit of kind of internal looking into things that you can do there. But also, if you're in Durham, feel free to drop us an email. Like, it's not kind of exactly what we do, but we're happy to chat you through and figure out if there's anything we can do or signpost you to anyone who can help with that as well.
Oh, won't be that wonderful. And yes, a lot of brainstorming that you have suggested. All right, we have next question. Hello, I am an HR manager at a growing tech startup. We really want to build a diverse team, but it's challenging to balance our diversity and inclusion goals with the need of quickly fill positions. Could you share some practical tips on how we can achieve a diverse workforce without slowing down our hiring process?
Yeah, I think you probably have one of the most challenging scenarios there, to be honest. Especially from a startup, it is difficult, and it's hard when you are in that startup and scale up stage where you don't really have the finances to invest in really complex programs or kind of almost hire people who aren't going to, sorry, my laptop's closing there, almost hire people who aren't going to immediately be working on stuff that's going to be published. I think the stuff we talked about earlier around kind of making sure your job advert language is kind of really inclusive, making sure that you are reaching out through different networks, so post things in Women in Tech, go to the universities and speak to their graduates, that kind of stuff is really useful. But also I do understand when you're trying to recruit a team for a startup, it is difficult and you do sometimes need to get people in quickly. And those people don't always necessarily line up with your longer term goals. I would try starting to build a network and start to build a talent pipeline. And if you're kind of in a position, I'm going to make the numbers up, but if you're in a position where you kind of go, we need 5 hires by the end of the year and we need them to be immediately working on the project and getting stuff into production and getting stuff published, then maybe you do just kind of have to hire who is available and take what diversity you can from that team. But is the potential to go, we need 5 hires by the end of this year and we need another 5 by the end of next year. Those 5 you need by the end of next year, can you start building a talent pipeline? Can you start almost building that future talent of, and a lot of this comes down to you as HR. So I'm sorry to add another thing on the plate of an HR manager for a tech startup who will be busy. But kind of going, is it possible to start reaching out and building a network and letting people know, look, we don't have anything for you right now, but stuff is coming and we'd love to have you and we really want to build a diverse team, and just making sure that when people think about your brand, like we kind of touched on with Opencast, when they think about your brand, do they think about you as being someone who is diverse and inclusive and kind of starting to build talent in the Northeast? And again, feel free to drop us an email. Happy to kind of brainstorm and see if there's anything we can support with around that as well.
That can surely be done. Thank you, Caroline. And we have another question here. I have been in the tech industry for over 8 years and recently relocated to the Northeast. Being from an ethnic minority, I have often noticed a lack of mentorship opportunities tailored to people like me. What kinds of initiatives could be put in place to better support the career growth of underrepresented professionals?
Yeah, I think there's definitely more we can do about that. And I think I always think it's a really interesting balance if we want mentors to mentor people from a range of different backgrounds, because we want them to have that exposure and we want mentees to have that exposure to mentorship from people who've maybe had completely different experiences to them. But I also think there's a lot of value in having a mentor who understands your specific challenges, and having someone who maybe has been through the same kind of life experience as you, whether that is because they come from a similar place, because they come from the same ethnic minority, because they're the same gender, something like that. There's value in that as well. There are, and these aren't necessarily Northeast based, there are some UK-wide mentorship programs that do look at that. So there are some specific mentorship programs designed for people from specific backgrounds. So, and from specific ethnicity. So definitely look into them. They might not be local, but they might have an understanding of your specific challenges. And then I'd also try and look locally as well. So it may be that actually there's 2 different people that you need here, and it may be that actually you want someone who understands your background, and then you want someone who understands where you are now, which is Northeast Tech. And ideally someone at the intersection of both would be great. But if we can't find that, then going for both sides might be kind of worthwhile. Absolutely, it would be great if we could put some more initiatives in place. It does always kind of come down to, and we've tried stuff like this before as well, to be totally honest, it comes down to finding mentors with the capacity, and trying to find enough of them to meet demand can be really, really challenging. So this isn't really an answer to your question, but it's just a general encouragement of people who already work in the tech sector and would like to mentor, then absolutely something to do. And I would also say, you've been in the tech sector for 8 years, so absolutely you look for a mentor, because there would be people out there who can support and who can help you. But also if you could mentor someone else at the same time, then that solves a little bit of the issue. It's not the instant fix, but I think people who maybe have a couple of years experience sometimes underestimate how valuable their experience is, even if it's only 1 or 2 years. Just if you have no experience at all, when you speak to someone with 2 years experience, you think, wow, they can really impart a lot on it. So yeah, I would encourage anyone to look at how they can mentor as well as be mentored, if possible. Pin it back.
Sounds great. We have so many questions already here. Another, what could the VCSE sector do to support more people from different backgrounds develop the skills needed in tech, and how can they connect their communities into the sector?
Yes, I'm really, and just voluntary community groups and social enterprises, for anyone that isn't familiar with the VCSE acronym. I'm really passionate about how we can get VCSE more involved. I think the first thing is and I'm only speaking as kind of Software City here, but I'm sure other organisations in other areas do the same. We do a lot of community work. So we'll work with community groups in Sunderland and South Tyneside in particular around getting their communities engaged in tech. And that could be everyone. We've went into kind of over 50s groups and young people and people from specific backgrounds, and kind of just almost laying the groundwork of what do you know about tech and what you're interested in, and that kind of stuff. So there's sessions like that we run, and there is other organisations where we're happy to try and signpost to who might do similar things. And I think connecting their communities into the sector, a lot of that comes down to stuff like Talent Engine. So kind of going, okay, what transferable skills do you have from, and then that might be from your community group, or that might be from stuff you've done before, or kind of your career before you went and had children, or whatever it is. And Talent Engine is one of the ways that we do that. We're also quite keen on how do we connect the tech skills we have with the VCSE sector as well. And I think there is a lot of overlap where the tech skills that people have could support the tech that the VCSE sector needs. And I think the people that the VCSE sector are connected to could definitely look to move into roles in tech. And it probably starts with those initial conversations and those kind of taster sessions, and gauging from your group how interested they are in tech, how much they know about tech, and kind of taking it from there. And again, if you're Northeast based, drop us an email. Like, happy to look at if we can support around that as well.
All right. Another. They have multiple questions for you. I think we are not going to leave you today, Caroline. All right. So, hi, I have been looking for a part-time role in tech because of childcare. I'm a new mother, but no tech company wants to offer part-time job. Do you have tips for part-time tech jobs?
Yeah, this is really challenging, and we've noticed the same thing. There are so few part-time roles advertised. And even when we know people who are working part-time in tech, it's quite often that they started full-time and they've dropped their hours, or they've condensed hours, or kind of whatever it is. There is very, very few, and we've got some data on this, but there's not many advertised part-time roles. And we spoke a lot earlier about how do we help more women into the workforce, and how do we do it? And this is one of the ways we could do it, because we know women, the vast majority of the time, take on the kind of main responsibility for childcare, and that they will usually work their career around their children. And if we're not offering part-time, then we are excluding them a lot. I'm slightly cheeky, so I would say always just ask anyway. Absolutely look into, is it possible to do part-time? In my experience, and this is really just in my personal experience of kind of having looked at companies, I would look at some of the public sector organisations who are sometimes able to offer a little bit more flexibility. But also I know there are some private companies out there who've done things like job shares. So it may be that they need someone for 40 hours a week, but do they need one person for 40 hours a week, or could 20 hours do it? And that sort of thing. Yeah, it is a problem. I'm not entirely sure I have the answer on how we address it, other than just speaking to businesses about it and trying to challenge that a little bit. And if you are comfortable being a little bit cheeky, I would definitely kind of get in touch with companies that are advertising roles that you think you're a good fit for, but the hours aren't quite right, and just say, look, I'm a brilliant fit for this job, but I can only do 20 hours a week or whatever it is. Is there a reason that I couldn't do that here? And just see what they say. The worst they say is no.
It's crucial to speak one's mind, right?
Yes, definitely. You've got to challenge them on it, otherwise they'll never know it's a problem.
True, I do agree with that. We have another question. Looking for tech roles with 10 years of experience in tech field and lived 1 year in UK. Please guide on how to improve network in terms of finding clients, projects as a sales consultant in tech industry.
Okay, so I think the Northeast's quite good for this. To be honest, we have quite a lot of networking. If you look, and I know it feels cheeky to kind of say my own company's website here, but just we do advertise a lot of them. Look on Sunderland Software City, we have tons of events we advertise. There are also events that places like the Northeast BIC run. There is something called Platform if you're interested in startups. There are Innovation Super Network. There are tons and tons of tech-specific networking events. And there's also a lot of things like Northeast Chamber of Commerce and kind of other companies that run smaller, more general networking events, which actually, if you're looking to kind of sell tech services to clients, they might be sort of places like Muscle Club, and that might be a little bit of a better fit. There is something called NetKnow, NETKNO. If you Google that, that is a platform where they kind of, I can't even think of the word. They pull together, there's definitely a word for that, all of the different networking events across the region, and you can kind of filter them out a little bit. You can absolutely search for them individually, go on Eventbrite, look for that kind of stuff. But NetKnow is a good one to look at as well for things like that. Other than that, I would do a lot of reading. So a lot of kind of, the Northeast Tech updates. There's tons of newsletters out there. There's tons of sites that tell you that sort of stuff. Just start to really understand the sector. And I think once you kind of get to grips with what companies we have here and what they do and who they work for and what they offer, then there's it's kind of almost easier. You can do a little bit of sales mapping and you can start to understand where your niche is and where you might be able to find stuff. And other than that, LinkedIn, like, I know networking and LinkedIn, something that everyone always kind of like cringes at a little bit, but it works. And there's a reason we still do it, and it is because it works. So definitely look into those kind of things, I would say, to start building a client base.
Caroline, thank you for your insights. Honestly, how significant it has been to have you here. I'll take just last question for you, Caroline, and then I wouldn't be able to take another because of the time constraint, but let first answer this one. Hi, I have recently moved to UK and work as a junior data analyst in a Northeast tech firm. Sometimes it feels like my experiences as an immigrant aren't fully appreciated or understood. What can tech companies do to ensure that perspectives and contributions of immigrant employees are fully valued and integrated into their diversity and inclusion efforts?
Yeah, there's definitely more that I would say almost every company can do around that. I think we quite often don't appreciate the lived experience that immigrants have and kind of the value that that brings. And I think it is, especially if you're quite a recent immigrant to the UK, there's this whole lived experience and this whole kind of viewpoint and stuff that you bring that people who have always lived in the UK or who have lived here for 20 years or kind of whatever it is maybe don't have. I think the first thing is recognizing that as a metric that you're looking at when you're doing equality and diversity and inclusion stuff. So I know we quite often look at kind of maybe 3 or 4 metrics. We look at gender, we look at ethnic diversity, we'll look at kind of LGBTQ, stuff like that. We kind of have a few that I think most companies will default to looking at. And actually things like socioeconomic background or immigration status and that kind of stuff are just as important and do feed into diversity. And especially and I know I've kind of banged on about diversity of thought a lot, but that diversity of thought comes from that. I think if you have an HR team or you have a line manager or someone like that who you're comfortable speaking to about it, I would definitely try and bring this up to just kind of say, I feel like maybe you don't quite fully understand my experience and I'd like to do some work around that. I also think there's something in it not being your responsibility to educate people, so that I am trying to be aware of that as well. If there are multiple people in your organization who have similar experiences, absolutely employee resource group. Like, can you get together and then kind of talk about these experiences and almost form a kind of peer group that you can feed that back to? But I think in terms of what the companies can do to make sure that those perspectives are kind of valued and integrated, it probably comes down to, first of all, recognizing that as a metric that they look at. So yes, you've spoke about the all of these different diversity metrics of your staff, but actually is immigration one of the ones that you've looked at? Like, are you understanding fully the difference between someone who kind of has lived in the UK 20 years, someone who recently moved here, someone who has indefinite leave to remain versus someone who's on a sponsorship visa versus someone who's on a graduate visa? Like, they're all very different experiences. And I think it's just trying to to understand that. So the first step is really recognizing it, speaking to the people within your organization who you know are going through that experience, and just kind of, I've said this a lot, but asking the questions, just asking what they need, asking what you can do, and kind of asking how we can make sure that they really feel part of that team and really feel part of the sector and the culture and the region, and that they feel settled here.
You know, when one gives such a good advice, it becomes, I think it is quite easy to say that it opens the door to many alternatives. Thank you, Caroline. I with Prime Talent, thank you for your sharing, your time, experience, and knowledge.
No problem. Thanks for having us.
Thank you. Dear viewers, for further query and question, kindly mail us at info@primetalent.com. My apologies to all those whose questions we couldn't address today due to the time constraint. Nevertheless, please feel free to write us at info@primetalent.com, and we shall get back to you. Also, you can visit our website www.primetalent.com. Thank you and have a great day ahead. Thank you.
Thanks.